Alrighty, so now I want to have us talk a little about that last example of doing the weather call, um, calling the API to get the weather for color codes location. And I wanted to talk a little about it because I think it's a good introduction to what we're going to do next week. And the sooner you get some exposure to looking at API documentation, the better. I'm just telling you, the more I do it, the better I get at it. So I'm just going to give you a brief introduction and just talk about the code. So what I have open now is I have 31 promises, right? So this is, I just commented out all the above code here. And I have just the fetch data, display data on error, and then I have the chain together, which is called the fetch data, right? Fetch data sets up a promise, does the fetch itself. I could just tell you, and we're going to cover fetch more next week because it's going to be part of the API. We're going to have next week is API discussion. And I think I'm going to use Color Codes API. I'm still watching his video and coding through that. But then, right, so then what happens here is we're going to make the fetch call, which, by the way, the fetch call itself returns a promise, which is why you get the .then here. So that's where I was talking about before, is that when you start implementing some of these API calls or different ways to do them, some of them just do, like we used to use HTTP request, which is still used today. And I think he's going to talk about some of these other techniques we used to use, but fetch has been a grand improvement to make this so much easier for developers. But the point that I'm trying to say here is that when we call the fetch, then behind the scenes, the fetch itself returns a promise. And then the promise, right, says then what comes back as a response. And now just run JSON on that. It's kind of the same idea when we were doing local storage, which is take the local storage data and convert it into JSON, right? Or convert it to JSON so we can store it in local storage and then convert it back to regular JavaScript the other way around. And then once you do that, then what you get back is data. So, and then the resolve here, we know about that by now, but this is the part that also kind of like, where does this come from? Where does this mean? So I'm going to walk you through this and in the process show you how to actually get the weather forecast for Fresno. Actually, I think I was playing around with temperature. I think he had short forecast. Let's make sure. Okay, so let's just go back over here. I'm going to rerun to make sure my code still works and it's clear. So it should be good to go. Okay, so let's start here. Is on this fetch call, right? We're going to go out to this URL. Now he doesn't show this, and I understand why it was at the last of the video. He's got another one talking about it, but I want to show you. So you could go to a browser window, you could paste that in. And this is actually what, when fetch hits this URL, this is what it's fetching all this data. And if you notice, if I can actually roll this up. Now, I think this is just built into all Chrome browsers, but you may see it looks like this, which is fine. The reason I like it here is that I can kind of play with rolling these things up and down. So notice that this is an object, right? So let's actually make it a little bigger. This is an object. Okay, and inside it, so where we've learned about array of objects, I can tell you it goes the other way. We have objects that in some of those keys are actually arrays, so it can go either way. So in this case, right, we have a lot of data, right? So this is really good to start looking at because, and if you, let's go back for a minute. So what we're going to do is hit this, right, URL. And then once we convert it, right, we're going to reference. Now remember, once we do the JSON, right, we're going to run the JSON conversion to it. And then we're going to get data back. And inside the data is what is in this entire object, right? That's what's in there. That's what data, that's what it represents. And then it's going to say resolve and point to properties, periods, right? We know this is an array reference. So let's go find that in here, just as a way to help you get introduced to these concepts. Okay, so what we know, properties here, great. Period here, right? And so period has a, let's see where that ends. It has an array, right? So periods is array. I'm looking for the other ending one to see where that ends. There's first object, second object, short forecast. There it is, right there. Okay. Oh, so that's interesting. There's actually a short forecast also. So we could have done 0 and got it out as well. That's interesting. That's when you have to really start digging down and trying to understand what the difference is. Oh, these are tonight. Ah, look at this, right? So if we want, he ended up getting the first one. So this was the forecast for, I just saw it. Where was it? Forecast for when? This afternoon, right? Oh, that's so cool. So if we pull, what he was pulling was this one, which was for tonight. That's totally cool. So that's where you start understanding how to read this data to get out what you want, because you're getting this huge treasure trove, I would say, of data. So how do you get the pieces you want? And that's where this is then where you start drilling down to find it, right? Okay, so now that you've seen that, now how do we do this for Fresno, right? So here's where I would start. So api.weather.gov. So I would start at weather.gov. I'd copy that just because I don't want to type. I'd go to weather.gov and I'd be like, holy mac, great information, right? It's, by the way, most of your weather apps use uh, the National Weather Service as their source. So this is kind of going to the source versus other services, which is not a bad thing. Okay. So I would look here and I would try to find like the API stuff about, and if I couldn't find it, which I probably couldn't for a site this big, if I kept looking, I bet I could find it, but I would just do this. So I'd go to Google, right? Google.com, and I would search for weather.gov API. Okay. If I search for weather.gov API, the first entry is a website. Looks like the other one we were looking at a minute ago. Sorry, I don't have it up anymore. But then it gives me an overview. It's like, holy mac, I get an overview of the API, which is totally awesome. And then what I can do is look at examples. And that's the best thing, because then it tells you kind of how to put this together. And it tells you, in this case, remember the API call we saw for his location was, it's like, what's the office? I didn't know, it didn't make sense. But grid X and Y, okay, I kind of get that a little bit. But then if I look down here, this is the one that makes the most sense to me. So we could kind of start here, which is the points, the lat and long. So what you can do is Fresno lat and long. Find the lat and long for Fresno. There it is. Okay, 36.73 north, 119 west. I think, is that the right lat and long? I think it's no -9. Yeah. So, oh yeah. So which one do we use? Maybe that's the key too. We can play around with that. Damn, see, I have to go dig a little deeper. That's okay. We can still play with it, right? Because now we have the lat and long. So now what we can do is we could take this URL to kind of get started, and we could go to a new tab. We could paste that in. Now we're not going to hit enter, because what we're going to do is grab the lat and long. So here's the latitude, which is the first number, and we're going to paste it over the brackets. We'll see what we get here. Might not give us the exact, but that's okay. You get the idea, hopefully. Now we'll paste this over the long. Okay, now we have an API call. Now we're not doing this in our code. We're just doing this in the browser to look at it. And look at this. We're getting some great data. Overwhelming data. But oh my goodness, if I keep looking through here, can I find what I want? I got a forecast. Look at this. Oh, and look at this. Forecast. I actually get the same URL that was used here, because it gives me grid points. That's there for Fresno. Is that right? No, that doesn't seem right. That's 53. Did I put in the wrong one? 36,119? That seems right. But it's actually 50, 53, 100. Oh, you know what? I think I already played with this one. I think his original one was actually not this. I think it was 3535. Actually, it was. This was a mistake. I had actually been playing with this already. So I think in his original code, I think it was something like OKX or something, and then like 3535. This is where having a catch in there would be good. Let's see if that was it. Oh, yeah, that did work. Okay. So that's what happens when you play with code. So in this case, this is correct, right? So if I click on this on the forecast on the API, I'm making a similar forecast call or the API call. And now I should start getting some data that's going to look familiar. Periods, right? So this afternoon, right? 69. Oh, based on my phone, that's correct. Tonight, it's going to be 60. Is that right? Yeah, 67. That doesn't make sense. Thursday, 67. Yeah. Tonight, it's going to be 44. Nice. So let's actually make this call in our code. Okay. So I'm going to do that. Paste that. Cool. Let's go look. Now if I got it right. It's clear right now. So now let's play just a minute. Let's actually play for a minute here. Let's say, because we got clear, I'm just going to slow down because sometimes when I get going. So we got the short forecast and we got the first entry. So, oh, actually we got the second entry. So what we got was for tonight. It's going to be clear tonight. Okay, so what if we search for temperature, but we want temperature for this afternoon? How would we do that? Right? So we would do temperature and we would change it. Let's see if we can do this. So I'd change this to 0. I'd change this to temperature. Let's see if we get it. Oh, that's awesome. That is totally fun. I hope you found that fun. To me, this is so powerful. Learning how to do this stuff is so powerful because first understanding the structure of the promise, understanding again, this is just the very beginning of fetch. We're going to cover it next week, but really the power in understanding how to find information because there's so much out there. Okay, starting with a base example, right? Then drilling down on what comes back to get out the information that we want. Okay, so, give me some feedback on your submission. Was that fun for you? Was that kind of cool to see how that works? And then this will be the last. You'll commit this with getting weather in Fresno. And again, I appreciate feedback because these examples are fun to work on, but they do take a bit of time, which is okay. I love learning for that, but I hope hopefully it made sense to you. And if it didn't make sense, you at least got the joy of understanding how to take somebody else's code and, understand it well enough to get the information you want. All right, that's it for this week. I'll start working on next week.